You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome on into Toronto Sports Rush for Bet Rivers, and we are so fortunate that it is a round two that is beginning with the Toronto Maple Leafs involved as we welcome you into McGuire Mondays. Pierre McGuire here with me, Julie Stewart-Binks. We have been talking about this team, thankfully, gratefully, for many months now, and now they set off onto a new journey in this next round against a familiar foe in a way in the Florida Panthers. They've faced them 2 times out of the last 3 years, and after getting past the Ottawa Senators in a series that had literally everything, and they win that one 4-2. They have a couple days off on the weekend, and now they start on Monday hosting Florida. Pierre, what do you think this team has maybe learned or what they'll take from that first round that could help them as they start this second round?
That every playoff game is a 60-minute game or more. So that's number one. Number two, you got to be really smart in terms of how you manage the puck. And number three, when a team plays an aggressive forecheck game against you, which Ottawa did at certain times of their series, you have to have a really smart system to come out clean, especially if you're Toronto. And that's something that I think will benefit them when they play the Florida Panthers, who are just an amazingly aggressive, hard-charging, pinch your defense kind of a team. And I think that last series will really be beneficial for Toronto.
Right. And we saw that Florida was really aggressive, of course, with the Tampa Bay Lightning and using a lot of intimidation tactics. And how do you think that they will go about using their physicality in the second round? Also, with the refs and the whole league being on notice that this is how they play.
Well, I think the number one thing Craig Berube is going to tell his guys is, look at fellas, we want you to be aggressive, but we want you to do it whistle to whistle. Don't get lured into post-whistle scrums, because that's where Florida really makes hay. They turn every shift, every sequence into a street fight. You can be a tough guy and still walk away from a street fight. You're not getting any merit points because you stood in after the whistle and fought somebody. So I think that's really important, Julie. And I'm sure Craig Berube's telling him that. You saw that little interplay he had the other day with the media. He said, they're a tough team. I didn't know that. Yeah, you sure know he knows that. I think the biggest thing, though, for Toronto, their star players know they're going to be targeted, so they have to be ready for that. Bennett is a tough guy to play against. Kachuk's obviously a tough guy to play against. And you can't say enough about Sasha Barkov and how hard he is to play against. And everybody's talking about all these different players and their stars. Look at some of their under. Luosterainen's a really hard guy to play against. Lundell's a really hard guy to play against. So you can't just look at the top end of their roster, Julie. It's the whole roster. But the biggest thing to me is if you don't stay out of post-whistle scrums, you're playing into the hands of Florida Panthers, and that's not the game Toronto wants to play.
Right. And so in what way do you think that they can use that against the Panthers in this round?
Well, I think the big thing is, and I'm sure because I've been through this, before every series and during the series, there's a series manager. And you make your points as a coaching staff and a management team saying, hey, here's the tape of what we got from the last round. This is what they do. This is what they try to do to get you off your game. Now, I'm sure Florida's going to do the very same thing about Toronto. Say, look at them. They hold up, or they grab guys' sticks in the slot, or they cross-check a lot down along the boards. So there's going to be give and take on both sides. But I think the one thing Craig can prepare his team for is constantly reminding them, when we need to get the artillery on the ice to defend our stars, we'll take care of it. I was that guy. I know how to do that. I've done it for a Stanley Cup. So I think his players believe in his street cred, and I think that's a big part of the battle going into a matchup with Paul Maurice.
Right. And you talk about Craig Berube and how they have played this style of playoff hockey that's maybe low event, not as exciting, close games this entire season. And now this is when it sort of matters the most. What do you think about the game, that their identity that Craig Berube has created with this team, do you think will be the greatest asset against the Florida Panthers?
The shot blocking and the physicality down low. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Stanley Cup winner, very underappreciated. Had a big offensive series, too, against Ottawa. And you know he'll be jacked up to play against his old mates. Simon Benoit, his defense partner on the left side. Fast, physical, mean, and fearless. So that's good. And then I think the Tanev-McCabe matchup capability is gigantic for them. And then I don't want to take anything away from Morgan Riley and Brandon Carlo. So if you look at Toronto's sixth defense, They close the gap quick in the neutral zone. They're very good in terms of taking away your space in the offensive zone. And to me, the biggest thing is their crease clears. Every single guy in that defense can clear the crease. That allows Anthony Stolarz to see the puck. Florida's big thing, they jam the opposition net. They try to get your goalie off his game. They'll bump you, they'll whack you, they'll hack you. Toronto's got the guys that can measure up for that. I think it's really important.
Right. And we saw these teams are very similar in a lot of the ways that you just mentioned right there. And we saw them match up against one another later in the end of the season, and they just got, hemmed into their own zone, completely dominated, so hard to be able to break the puck out. How do they maybe deal with what that playbook is going to be from Florida in one that everyone knows, they know well, but now they somehow have to figure out how to actually figure it out?
So one of the first things I'd be doing is talking about tight reverses for our defense. So let's say your right defenseman gets the puck in the right corner. He starts skating behind the net. Lure that first forechecker in. The left defense will roll off the net. They'll reverse it to him, and then you'll have clean access off the right side of the or up the right side of the ice. That's one way. Another thing is, rather than incorporate the defenseman, let your left defenseman post up in front of the net, have that right D carry the puck, and then the centerman replaces the defenseman. So it's a tight reverse to the center. That'll break the pressure of the forecheck, and then that centerman can come up the right side of the ice. So there, and I'm just using the right side to make it simple for everybody at home because I don't have a telestrator to do it. But those are different ways. The other way you do it is you don't go D to D. You go D, wing, boom, right to the middle with a bump pass. So there's probably 3 or 4 different mechanisms you can deploy, and you can show your players that it's not hard for them to grasp that. It's pretty easy. But if you're not prepared for that really omnipresent physical fast forecheck of Florida, you will get hemmed in, you will give up a ton of shots, and you will get scored on, and you will probably not win the series.
Okay, so that first example that you gave, I was trying to just figure it out in my mind. It was like that gif of the numbers going past the woman's face. So can you explain it to me like I'm 5?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean?
Okay, so you're the right defenseman for Toronto, and you have the puck in the right corner, our right corner, and you start skating towards our net, behind the net. I'm the left D. My back is to the post because I'm keeping everything in front of me. As soon as I yell reverse, that right D who's skating by the net just chips the puck back from where he came from. I'm the left D coming with speed. I pick it up. I'm beating that first forechecker, and I have open access up the right side of the ice.
Okay, I got that. That's good. Yeah,
So
I'm
now
imagining myself.
the second one I presented was instead of that D leaving the front of the net, you do it with your centerman. So the right D will take the puck, and the center will yell reverse, 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 and then the D will reverse, and the center comes up, and you still don't lose slot area presence in case there's a turnover. So there's different ways you can do it.
I love that. Okay, this is great. I like these. Maybe we break down situations and put ourselves inside of them. One big thing for Florida that has been talked about, but I got the stats, is the fact that they have played so much hockey over the last 3 years. And these are some of the top 6 guys in the entire league that have played the most playoff games are all on Florida. Tkachuk has played 60, Barkov 59, Forsling 59, Reinhart 59, Verhaeghe 59, Lundell 58. Bobrovsky is first amongst all goalies, having played 57 playoff games over the last 3 years. And that's almost like an extra season for a goaltender. We are always kind of wondering when this will sort of catch up with them. Do you think that, in what way do you think that having this much playoff experience might be, at this point, sort of a disadvantage?
First of all, I love the fact that you had those numbers because it's so spot on. It's a great point, Julie. That's number one, and it will have an effect. Number 2, and this is really important, nobody's talking about how many players from Florida played in the 4 nations. They had 8 guys that played in the 4 nations, and one of them hasn't been healthy since the 4 nations, Matthew Tkachuk. And I still don't think he's healthy. He didn't skate yesterday before they flew to Toronto. So I would say this. It definitely will play a role. Toronto clearly is not playoff fatigued. I think everybody knows that in the marketplace. Pittsburgh, and I'm just going to use this from personal experience. 91, they won the Cup. 92, they won the Cup. 93, the Pittsburgh Penguins won the President's Trophy. They lost in the second round in Game 7 to the New York Islanders on a David Volek game-winning goal. If you remember, well, you're not old enough, but
Wait, what year did you say again?
1993. And I'm only joking.
Oh, I remember the Jays winning the World Series then, so I might have picked something else up.
But my point is that the Pittsburgh Penguins didn't beat the Islanders that year and probably should have got a repeat. If they would have beaten the Islanders, they would have won the Cup. I'm convinced of that. And the reason why they didn't, they were out of gas. It's to your really good point, I think. All those playoff games played by guys like Mario and Brian Trotty and Larry Murphy and Gordy Roberts and Kevin Stevens and Rick Tocchet and Ronnie Francis, Jaromir Jagr. Those were our players, Joey Mullen. They were out of gas. We had nothing left to give because of the previous 2 years. So I think your point is so spot on. It's really good.
When does it come into fruition, though? Because it's something we've talked about all year, and it feels like it hasn't actually manifested itself. But it's like, is there a point in the playoffs where it's like, just as an aside, I remember back to when Tampa was against Colorado and they were in their third final in 3 years. And it was the game that Colorado won where it just felt like Tampa couldn't even move on the ice anymore. They were just like stuck. Like, do these games add up later on in the in the playoffs if they were to advance, or does it still, even each game, like in a little bit of a way, sort of like take a toll on the guys' bodies?
So the second part of your premise is spot on again, and here's what I'd like to share with you. So yeah, it starts to accumulate, but the other part is how a series goes. So let's just say Toronto holds serve and wins the first 2 games at home. There's 3 things you want to accomplish in a playoff series. You want the team that you're playing against to be concerned, to doubt, and to have fear. Concern, doubt, and fear are 3 things you want to implement in your opponent's mind. Concern, doubt, and fear. So if you win the first 2 games in your Toronto, Florida's concerned. They're probably doubting a little bit, but they're not fearful because they haven't lost at home yet. So you got 2 of the 3 covered. You go win game 3, and all of a sudden fear starts to become part of it. And that's when all those extra games start to accumulate because you realize, oh my gosh, I got to go through this again. How deep do we have to dig? And can I dig that deep? And so it's all a mindset. It becomes really hard. And that's why I went back to that early 90s Penguins team. They win back-to-back cups. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, we're in a game 7 against these guys. I'm not sure we're prepared to dig that deep. And they had won the President's Trophy that year. Like they were a juggernaut. They were the best team in the league by a mile. That's what I'm saying. If they get by the Islanders, they're winning the cup. I mean, they're three-peating. So you asked me, when does it start to accumulate? It starts to accumulate if a series goes wrong and they have to chase. And that's why tonight, game 1 is really important for Toronto. Really important because they got to set the tone in the series early.
Set the tone and show that also they're a different team than they were 2 years ago. And I think also when they faced them those 2 years ago, Florida hadn't won the cup yet, right? Like they were still a team. That was when they had beaten Boston, and everyone in Toronto was really excited about facing Florida because it wasn't Boston, but really obviously that was when they just went and started their dominance. So then if you were speaking to like a Leafs fan, let's just take producer Tim as an example, who, a little bit negative on the idea of facing Florida again. Also, I'm speaking for Tim. I'm just assuming that he's probably like that because I know him pretty well. And so what would you say that the Leafs, in what way are both teams different now that could go in the Leafs' favor for this matchup?
The Leafs are deeper and more physical, and they're fearless when it comes to shot blocking. And your point at the beginning of the show was, again, spot on. You talked about how over 82 games, Toronto played a certain way, a playoff style that their coaching staff has ingrained into them. Lane Lambert's won the Stanley Cup as a coach. Craig Berube has won the Stanley Cup as a coach. Mike Van Ryan has won the Stanley Cup as a coach. Mark Savard has been part of a Stanley Cup winner. So you got all these guys that are on your bench that understand the process of winning. Don't discount that. It's a huge thing. I've learned it over time, both as a TV guy and also as a coach. It does matter. And everybody dreams about winning the Stanley Cup, and until you want it, you have no idea what it takes. You can think you know, but you don't know. And I don't mean you. I just mean people,
No,
coaches in
I have no
general.
idea what it takes.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's a big part of it. What we're just talking about is, the Leafs are bigger, they're deeper, they're meaner, they're fearless. They have a system that works and they have confidence in it. And their shot blocking is unbelievably good, and they're really deep in goal. If Anthony Stolarz can't carry the ball, Joseph Woll probably can. But I think they'll run with Stolarz. We'll go back to what we talked about when we did our first show way back when in October, I think. Anthony Stolarz was the biggest free agent heist in the marketplace last year. Not even close. Not even close.
Right. And I agree with you on that. There have been some question marks about him in the last couple games down the stretch. What kind of maybe grade would you give him heading into this series, just knowing where he was at the end of the first series and some of the question marks? You said we might see Woll at some point. Obviously, that's a situational basis, but how do you feel in terms of like maybe like a grade, like A to F? Where would you put Stolarz right now?
I'd give him a solid B and teetering on B plus. Playoff goaltending is not easy, especially when you're not getting a lot of shots. And in a lot of the games that Toronto played against Ottawa, the shot totals weren't very high, but the quality of chances were very good. So it was a different kind of a game for him to play. I'll never forget it. I'm such a big Curtis Joseph fan. Curtis
Mm-hmm.
Joseph had no problem playing for teams where the shot totals were really high because he wanted action. He craved action. He had to have action. But then he went to Detroit where he was giving up, getting 16 to 17 save opportunities a game, and he couldn't play. It was a totally different thing. And eventually he got moved out of there. And people were shocked. They were like, what's wrong? The defense is better in Detroit than it was in Toronto or Edmonton or St. Louis. And the truth is because his mechanics just didn't fit that kind of a style. I think for Stolarz, the mechanics are pretty good for what Toronto's doing right now and the way they're playing. And I expect he's going to have a real solid B performance in the next playoff series as well. And that's good enough to win. That's good enough to
Okay.
win.
And when you mentioned just that with the shooting and seeing different shots and the mechanics of that, reminded me to talking with some of the PWHL coaches this past weekend. And Corey Chevry from Montreal said that they had been really working on shooting and technique and just like various different, basically kind of like volume shooting is what they really wanted. But when you have a good goalie, it was like they didn't want to necessarily test them out and give them that opportunity to get settled into the game, which I found interesting because I hadn't thought about that I actually just hadn't really thought about that, like not actually getting a goalie tested. When you're going up against Bobrovsky, I mean, you want to get a lot of shots on him, but how do you not give him confidence?
Biggest thing is you got to bump him a little bit. And I know people are saying, yeah, can't, that's goalie interference. Just got to let him know you're there. I remember being part of a staff that drew up a game plan to play against Eddie Belfour in the Stanley Cup final. And Eddie was really good. He was on top of it then. Back in the early 90s, Eddie's was as good as there was in the league. He was really good. But he also had a hair trigger temper. So you had to bump him. You had to let him know you were there. You had to get your stick in there after whistles. You had to do certain things to get him off his game a little bit. And eventually we got Eddie. We played 4 games against him. We got Eddie pulled out of 2 of the games. Eddie got pulled in game 2, and Eddie got in trouble in game 3, even though it was a 1-0 game, because he and Chelios went a little bit kaflooey. And so there's certain things you got to do. There's certain things you got to do. And I think with Bobrovsky, it's kind of like the Belfort treatment. And he doesn't have the same kind of temper, but he's one of those guys that likes it neat. He likes it sanitary. And doesn't mean that's a bad thing because he's so darn good. But I tell you what, if I was putting a plan together, it would not be very sanitary.
Is there a way so could that either give him the idea like, okay, I know I'm going to have a guy that's going to be bumping me or they're going to bump me, or is that also, and then that helps him sort of figure out maybe, okay, this isn't the game plan I want, but I'm going to expect this, or does it sort of maybe trick him into thinking that there might be someone there or like on the back post, like somewhere, like is there sort of a mind game to that?
Yes, 100%. And that's such a good point. And it's all between the ears. It's absolutely right, Julie. I think the other thing too with Bobrovsky, he knows what it takes to win. And Stolarz learned a lot from him. And there's mutual respect there. And I really admire that between both of them. But you know that Stolars has been giving out tons of intel to his teammates and coaching staff. And you also know the Florida Panthers, they know they had to play against Stolars every day in practice. They know his strengths and weaknesses as well. So this is one of those little things that's going to happen. It's the game within the game. It'll be interesting to see who breaks first. Will it be Anthony Stolars or will it be Sergei Bobrovsky?
Right. Okay. And my final question before we wrap things up. We know that the city of Toronto has a lot invested in the Toronto Maple Leafs, and in just everything about everyone in that city is in a love-hate relationship with this team. The team on the ice seemed like they were able to compartmentalize that in a way in which it didn't infiltrate the room. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But how does this team on the ice either use or block out the energy from the fans that could be both negative or very positive?
I would just focus on the positive. The negative guys, you don't even have, or women, you don't even have to pay attention to them. But the noise levels will be huge. Look at outside the building. Every night, all the fans are there to support them, whether the team's on the road or at home. The players hear about that. They know about that. I think that's really important. I looked at what was going on with Montreal in their series with Washington and the support that the Canadians had from their fan base. It was amazing. Look at it in Winnipeg. I'm convinced without the passion of the fans in Winnipeg, I don't think the Winnipeg Jets win that series. They wouldn't let Connor Hellebuck fail. They knew they were going to have to play without Mark Scheifele, but they needed another star, and that other star ended up being Cole Perfetti. And it was all positive energy from their fans. I think the Leaf fans are going to be very positive. The one thing I would say, it's really important, if you're a fan, you're going to a game, don't sit on your hands. Like, get after it.
Yeah.
Get after it. Make that place a hard place to play in Toronto.
We heard Austin Matthews say that during the middle of the season, how quiet it had been in there at that point. And even yesterday, watching the Jets game, it wasn't until just under 3 minutes remaining in regulation, you just looked at the entire crowd. They were sitting on their hands. And then, of course, they score and get within one. And it was just hearing Adam Lowry in the post-game show talk about the fact that they then the crowd helped them tie things up, because before that, he said the phrase like, we were dead in the water before that, because it seemed like they were. The fans had already seemed pretty reserved.
They were. They really were. It's interesting. I will never forget this, Julie. I had the honor of doing the 2010 gold medal game between Canada and the United States in Vancouver. Chris Cuthbert and I were working in a two-man system. And I asked Ronnie Wilson, the coach for Team USA, the next day at the airport. We were flying. I was flying back to Toronto. He was flying back, I think, to Toronto as well, actually. And I asked him, I said, when did you know like your team was going to be a little bit flat? Because they were flat to start overtime. He said, I knew in the dressing room. I said, how'd you know? He says, we had to expend so much energy to tie the game that our guys had nothing left to give. And as I watched that game unfold last night and they tie it with 1.6 seconds to go, I'm saying to myself, they might have the Team USA syndrome from 2010, but they didn't. They were able to go, and it's amazing they were able to do it. No Josh Morrissey, no Mark Scheifele. Yeah. It's amazing what they were able to do. And it's to your point. That's why I'm talking about this. The fans got them to the next level. See, when Team USA played in Vancouver, it was a Canadian crowd. It wasn't an American crowd. And I'm watching that, and I'm trying to, why did that happen? And I'm convinced the fans really made a big difference in Winnipeg to help that team last night.
Yeah. And also a reminder for those guys on the ice too, like just how much it means to that city and to the fan base and everything, and that they get a bad rep like the city does. And Rick Bowness talked about it in the post-game show too. Just, I sent it to a bunch of my friends in Winnipeg. Just, they really wax poetic about, the identity of that city and the team and how much it means to them, and really just how they probably did help them in that regard. They didn't help them in the first 60 or 57 minutes of the game as much as maybe they had hoped, but I'm sure they were a little nervous at the same time. Well, we'll have to see, though, if the Toronto fans will be ones that will help in this game tonight, or if they will be stuck in the Platinum Lounge as they try to get to their seats midway through the first and second period. Third period, as we know, we've seen in the past, because the Leafs will need it against a very tough, physical Florida Panthers team that, as we know, with their hashtag on Twitter, is time to hunt. So they know they can smell that blood in the water, and that means they know when to pounce and when to fight. But the Leafs have been able to show a lot of resilience, as we saw in the last round too, being able to come back even when they were down 3-0 in the series and being able to win the series 4-2. So, being up 3-0 in the series and then winning it, even though they faced some adversity. Pierre, thank you so much for all your insight analysis on our McGuire Monday. And everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening. Make sure to subscribe and like, and we will see how things go, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.